Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to PM Powered's next podcast. PM Powered is a consulting uh, organization that it can help you with your project, program, and portfolio needs. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on everything that has to do with project, program, and portfolio management. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing I want to bring you is a little bit outside of the wheel that I normally do, but I'm hoping there are some people on here that are not project or program or portfolio managers. So what are the steps that you need to do if you're not a project or portfolio manager and you want to have project success? Because many times a functional manager is assigned to be the project manager. So this comes to us from Forbes, Women's Forbes, and it's a thing called 8 Steps to Project Success, even if you're not a project manager. So I just wanted to look at it and see if I agreed with all these steps, and I'll give you my 2 cents afterwards. So the first one is understand the scope. That goes without saying. You've got to understand what you're doing. So is this in or out of scope? Because if you're not clear on what you're doing in your project, then other things start to creep in. Think about that you're going to update your tub. And so all you want to do is put in a new tub. That's all you want to do. But then you start looking at the tile in the bathroom and you say, oh, well, that needs to be done. That should be a separate project. So be careful with what we call it as scope creep. The second thing is to kick off the project. If you're a functional manager and you have people working for you on this project, you can't just leave them in the dark. I can't overemphasize communicate. And the kickoff doesn't have to be a long, extensive kickoff, especially if this is a small project. It can be done in 15 minutes. You need to tell people what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it, how the project will work, what's the timeline, what's the budget, etc. So kick off the project. Step 3, document and prioritize tasks. You don't have to build out a schedule that is very detailed, that has predecessors and successors that a project manager will do, but you do have to document all the tasks that need to be done and then prioritize it. For example, if you're building a house, you can't put on the roof before you put up the walls, or you can't put up the walls before you put in the foundation. So there's certain things that you must be done. So prioritize the tasks. Step 4, manage the agreed upon scope. Remember, as I said in step 1, you got to understand what your scope is. So you have to go to whoever is the leadership and agree that this is the scope. So get it in writing if you possibly can, that says this is what we're going to do in this project and this is the scope. I would also emphasize that you might want to put what's outside of scope. Step 5, keep everyone in the loop. Communicate, communicate, communicate. One of the biggest downfalls on projects, whether it's big or small, is the lack of communication from the project manager. So over-communicate. Yes, you might tick off some people, but at least they know what's going on. And when I say over-communicate, it doesn't mean you have to go to each individual and communicate. You can do it by email. In fact, you might want to put together a little communications plan. It doesn't have to be elaborate, that says, I'll communicate with the stakeholders on such and such a day. I'll communicate with the sponsor on such and such a day. I'll communicate with leadership on such and such a day, and with team members on such and such a day. So understand how you're going to communicate with your team. Escalate issues when appropriate. How many times have you been on a project and the issues just linger and they linger and they linger and they don't get closed out? That could cause a project to go into a death spiral. So make sure that your project's issues are communicated and that they're closed out quickly. If you can't close them out, then they need to be escalated. Step 7, keep focus when there are distractions or priority shifts. So stay focused on your project, especially if you're a functional manager or you have another day-to-day job. You've got to keep focused on this project. It doesn't mean you have to do it all hours of the day, but make sure you know where the project's going, how it's going to be done, who's doing what, and you keep people informed. Last but not least is wrap up the project. Know when the project is at its end and officially end it. That many times the project will continue and continue and continue because people don't understand that it's closed. So make sure that everybody understands that the project is now closed. You need to have a success party if it was successful, and definitely have a lessons learned on the things that didn't work out well. So these are 8 things that a functional manager or somebody who is not a project manager should do when they are assigned a project. However, there's one key thing that I think was missed, and this thing is actually 2 things. Understanding the risks, because every project has a risk, and if the risk, and understand how you might mitigate that risk. It doesn't have to be elaborate. So for example, if I was putting in a tub in my bathroom and I only have 3 people and the tub is too heavy to take into the bathtub, that is a risk. So what are you going to do to mitigate that risk? That's one thing. That's a very simple one. The other one is to look at your budget. Every project has a budget, and you need to look at it maybe on a weekly basis to understand what your burn rate is and understand if you can make that budget or not. Because if you're not, then you need to let leadership know so that they can either bring back the scope or give you more money. So understand that, but you have to control the budget. You can't just let it go out of control. So those are things that you need to do if you are not a project manager, but you've been assigned a project. So let's talk about top 10 keys to project management success. This has to do if you are a project manager, and this comes out of CAM's project. So they have a little graphic on here, and it's a circle, and in it, in the middle in red is project management, but on the circle it has design, develop, analyze, evaluate. So we all do that as project managers, but let's talk about the 10 steps that they have. One is planning. Yes, we all need to plan our projects if we're project managers, and sometimes we don't spend enough time planning, and that's sadness. Many times we get caught up in people telling us, why are you doing all this paperwork? Just get on with the project. Well, you need to plan the project. If not, you're going to have a disaster. So identify and understand your risks early. I can't overemphasize that. And continue to identify and understand your risks throughout the project. Many times it's done very well at the beginning of the project, and then they just forget about the risks and don't update them, or don't even go back and look at the mitigations for the risks. So do that on a circular basis and do it continuously throughout the life cycle of the project. You need to have top management support. If you don't have top management support on your project, then are you working on the right project? You might think about going to another one or changing the leadership on it. If this is an important project and you have a sponsor that's not supporting you, go talk to other leadership or talk to the sponsor and see if they're too busy. Maybe you need a new sponsor. Take the risk and do it. Don't micromanage. Oh, I have been on too many projects where the project manager is micromanaging. And this often happens if you have a project manager that understands the detail work of the project. So for example, if you're putting in a new software or you're coding software and the project manager is a coder or was a coder, they get down into the weeds of the coding aspects of the project. Don't do this as a project manager. You're looking at the overall. You are not going down to the details. 5, choosing the right people for the right jobs. Absolutely. If you can do that, that is an absolute thing that you need to do. But sometimes you can't get the right people for the right jobs, and you may have to get a less qualified person to do that. And sometimes that's good because these people are eager to learn. But you might have to get a mentor for these people or a coach. And so the person that you weren't able to get full-time that was more experienced maybe has enough time to coach or mentor this individual. But it's not a bad thing when you have less qualified people. You just may have to put a little bit more slack time into your project. Number 6, effective communication. I can't overemphasize communicate. And it's got to be effective. You are a project manager, so you should know how to communicate. Develop your communications plan. Understand how to work around it. 7, instill a sense of urgency, but not emergency within your team. So not everything can be an emergency, and nor do you want to do that. But you do have to have a sense of urgency of getting to the end goal. So you can't be lackadaisical on your project, because if you give an air of being a laissez-faire leader, or one that just sits down and doesn't really take uh, an active, participative role on the project, then your team is going to do the same thing. So always show a sense of urgency of getting things done and mirror that, and that's what you'll see on your project. Have clearly defined goals and project milestones, and celebrate your wins. I don't know how many projects I've been on that do not celebrate wins. So do that. Understand what the goals are. Have short-term goals and long-term goals. Understand what the project milestones are. Many times I see schedules and they don't have any milestones in them. And I said, how do you know you're done? And they said, well, we get the work done. Well, unless you have a milestone to show that the work's done, you can't do it. And celebrate small wins on your project, and also celebrate things that are happening with the people on your project. If somebody has a baby, celebrate that. If somebody gets married, celebrate that. If somebody has had a hard time in their life and they were able to overcome it, celebrate that. There's nothing wrong with celebrating things. And then if you have sad things happen on the project, so for example, you might have a death. I was on a project where we had somebody die in a car accident, and that was very heart-wrenching for the project team. Understand that. Be supportive of that. For example, I gave everybody the day off to go to the funeral, and gave them some time to grieve. There's nothing wrong with that. You should do that. If not, you're going to see something happen on the other side that you don't want to see. So resolve issues fast. We saw that in the steps for somebody that's not a project manager. Don't let issues fester, because if you do, they're going to end up bringing down and spiraling down the project. So resolve issues fast. If you see an issue that's staying open, get involved with it. Understand why it's staying open. Bring leadership in to shut it down. Finally, measure project success. That kind of goes with the goals and the milestones and the celebration of wins. So understand what how your project is going to be successful. So have KPIs that measure success. And from that, you can then calculate if you're going to need to do some other things other than let the project go on as it's going. So for example, if your budget is out of control or is starting to wane in the wrong way, you need to be able to look at it and understand what's causing it to do that. That is the one thing that I did not see on here, was measuring your budget and understanding your budget and controlling your budget. So that's one thing I would do. And also time. You need to measure time. You can't do anything with time. You can't lengthen it. You can't shorten it. But you can absolutely look at your milestones and see if you're making the dates for your milestones. And if you're not, how are you going to recover that time, if at all possible? So while they had 10, I actually put in 12. So I added budget and I added time. So make sure time equals schedule. So make sure you look at those as well. So finally, let's go to 5 real-world successful project management examples. Now, this is a little bit different because I'm looking at portfolio. These are all portfolios, but portfolios drive your projects and your programs. So you have to have portfolio management if you want to be successful with an overall view of your projects. So the first one is with American Airlines. I live in Philadelphia, and that was the headquarters for U.S. Airways, and American Airlines and U.S. Airways combined, and they created an overlap. This created an overlap of technology and programs, and they knew they had spreadsheets would be insufficient to run the merging of these two companies. To gain visibility in the broader divisional and global priorities, they began using portfolio and resource management for time entry, resource management, and capacity planning. This is what portfolio management does. They look at resources and they look at capacity planning, and they look at how are we going to get things done. And so what happened with this? So let me read you some of the success stories of American Airlines. As a result, the airline went from capitalizing 10% of their IT labor to 20%. That's absolutely incredible, which equated to a multi-million dollar net positive impact on their balance sheet. Now they have access to better, more reliable data to make critical decisions on projects and resources. So portfolio management helps you put your resources where the resources need to be at the right time. No, it doesn't go down to the name, but it might go by the skill set. So it might say, I need 20% of my IT management here. I need 30% of it here, etc. So let's go to another one. Royal Bank of Scotland. The RBS has had a lot of disasters, and you can read about them in the news, but they finally did something right. So let me read this to you. So RBS needed to establish consistent, reliable data to inform financial and resource decisions. They chose portfolio and resource management to drive consistency as they decommissioned 35 legacy systems, 50 plus user development tools, and hundreds of spreadsheets. Can you imagine running a bank and its infrastructure on spreadsheets? To me, that's just unfathomable. So look at everything that they were able to sunset. With data in different formats and hundreds of projects managed by different systems, they wanted to get a grip on their data to see their total portfolio more clearly. They could deliver on their business case and achieve ROI within 12 months. Can you believe that? Within 12 months, they were able to establish consistent, reliable data. So the next one is Cengage Learning was unable to forecast capacity effectively. How many companies do you know that you've worked at, and I've worked at several, that could not forecast their capacity, and therefore their hiring and firing was almost on a whim of the industry. And to me, that's no way to run a company. And therefore you see companies that are hurting tremendously because they have no idea what they need to do with the capacity planning. So Cengage was managing projects and resources with spreadsheets. Can you believe that in today's age? Was creating complexity for the medical and education publishing company. They wanted to integrate the planning and execution stages of product delivery. They chose portfolio and resource management investment and capacity planning to show executives all the great work they could tackle if they just had the sufficient resources. If you can show management what you need and you can show that it's going to drive down to the ROI, then management will do it. Unless the company's going bankrupt, and then they can't do it. But if you can show them if you need more resources and how it drives that ROI, they will help you achieve that. And this is what Cengage do. Now they can prioritize and push projects down the timeline and more easily identify which groups need more hires or new hires. Excelis Blue Cross Blue Shield had limited visibility into resource capacity as many decisions were based on inaccurate data. How many companies have you seen make strategic decisions and they don't have the right data? To me, this is something that should not be done in today's age. We've got technology that can give you what you need almost instantaneously. AI can do that for us. They chose portfolio and resource management to improve data quality and drive better project choice. As a result, their timesheet submission rate improved to 99%. That's incredible to me. Now senior leadership has greater visibility into portfolios to ensure compliance. Data-driven decisions and labor forecasts can be based on actual versus outdated resource structure. With the portfolio properly aligned with resource capacity, the health insurer is more capable of delivering work on time and therefore driving to its ROI. If you're doing work on time, then you can do more projects. And in fact, I would push Excelis Blue Cross Blue Shield to either deliver projects sooner, and that means they can bring in more projects. And this can be done if you're doing portfolio management. I've seen it done. I've done it. And finally, let's go to Flowserve. Flowserve is a large manufacturer with 19,000 employees, wanted to drive new product growth and gain insights to improve their decision making. They were struggling to optimize labor productivity, track projects, and control costs. With portfolio and resource management, Flowserve has become nimble and delivers products to market more quickly. Using an automated gate review process, they are now better able to manage work in the pipeline, speed time to market, which mitigates launch delays. I don't know how many companies I've been in that their pipeline was just out of control. They didn't know what had been there forever, what needed to be taken out, which things were no longer even able to put a proposal on. So can you think of a company that does manufacturing and they are now early to market? That means they are the leaders in that area. So my hat's off to Flowserve for bringing in portfolio and resource capacity management to understand to bring their products to market quickly. Good job. So we can see now that these are 5 success stories of portfolio management. And as a portfolio manager, I can tell you that it is very successful, but leadership has to be there. If leadership is not there to back up, because it is a culture shift when you do portfolio management, it will not succeed. I've had portfolios that didn't succeed because leadership was not behind it. So if you're going to do portfolio management, I've got to push that leadership, and I mean at the organizational and even at the strategic level, so the C-suite need to be behind portfolio management. I hope these 3 segments have brought to you some ideas of what we can do, even if we're not a project manager. Before I started project management, I didn't realize that buying a car is a project. Doing remodeling on your house is a project. Buying a house is a project. So think about what I brought to you in this. If you're just starting as a project manager or you're do project management as a sideline. Then I also talked to you about the key successes of project management. Remember, you as a project manager need to do those 10 items, but you also need to look at your schedule and you also need to look at your budget. And finally, portfolio management is finally starting to make strides in industry. And as a portfolio manager, it's happy news to me to see this happening. So this podcast has been brought to you by PM Powered. Please go out to PM Currents and follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. I would love to have you following me and listening to my podcast. You can contact me on Wanda@pmpower.com. I'd love to hear from you. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? Are you a project manager on a project or on a program, or are you a portfolio manager and you love to discuss some aspect of what you're doing? I'd love to hear from you. Please contact me at Wanda@pmpowered.com. Have a wonderful Monday, and I'll see you next Monday.